Welcome to MMA Below The Surface, where we dig deeper on upcoming UFC cards and combat sports events. I'm your host, Maveen Ahluwalia, and today we're breaking down UFC Fight Night, Kattar versus Giga Chikadze. So without further ado, let's get to it. So to start us off on the main card, we have a featherweight belt, Bill Algeo versus Joanderson Brito. Let's start with Bill. Some of his strengths: creative striker, comes from a Muay Thai background, but has a very karate-like style, which is very odd. Has that long, wide stance, hands down, baiting with his head. Throws a lot of kicks off the front leg, side kicks. Has some spinning attacks as well. I've seen him a couple times go for the spinning elbow. A lot of flying knees. Just a really creative and likes to mix it up. And comes forward with a lot of those karate blitzes as well, those multi-punch combos. Really a volume guy, not a lot of one-punch knockout power, but really puts it on people with the combos and comes forward a lot of forward pressure as well. Now, in terms of some of his weaknesses, one thing that's really held him back is been his takedown defense. He's 1-3 in the UFC right now. Made his UFC debut against Ricardo Lamas, who's an absolute savage, former featherweight contender for the belt, and really put it on him a couple times, almost finished him on the feet. But like I said, it's just that takedown defense that has really held him back and got him into big trouble in that third round, and picked up a nice win in his second fight, but then again against Ricardo Lamas. Those takedowns just added up over the fight, and honestly, I think it's what held him back. But on the feet, he's always been very competitive whenever I've seen him. And it's really just that takedown defense that's been a main thing. And also does leave his head a little open just because he does have that hands down style, does leave him vulnerable, but he's shown a hell of a chin in all of his fights as well. Now for his opponent, Joanderson Brito, the Brazilian, coming in off the Dana White Contender Series and making his debut. It is his UFC debut, but don't get it mixed up. Guy's riding a 10-fight win streak coming in, so he's going to have a ton of confidence. A huge tank, explosive. His last fight on Dana White Contender Series came out with a flying knee straight into a double leg takedown. Put the guy on his butt right away. Great top pressure. Really just one of those guys that puts 100% into every single one of his strikes. And really doesn't leave anything left in his tank. But surprisingly, even his fights on the amateur scene that I've seen go all 3 rounds, even though he's putting everything into these, his cardio has held up. He has slowed down. Don't get me wrong, he has slowed down. But I've never seen him fully gas out. So for going that hard, that's pretty impressive. He's a wild striker, but it can leave him vulnerable at times. I think he tries to really use it to close the distance in his fights, but against a really high level striker, it could put him in serious trouble. Now, in terms of how these guys match up, I think Joanderson's going to have the speed and the athleticism advantage in all. He's going to be a lot stronger than Bill. I think he's going to be able to dictate where the fight goes just with that takedown ability. And it's really up to Bill Algeo to have improved that takedown defense and to be able to keep this fight on the feet, because if he gets taken down early, Joanderson's not gonna go lightly on him, and I think it's just gonna add up over time. I think for Bill coming into this, he really has to try to aim to withstand those those big shots coming in, and really focus on defending the takedowns and trying to get this fight into the later round and then putting it on Joanderson. For Joanderson, I think he's going to do the same thing he always does. Every fight I've seen of his comes forward, blasts huge body kicks, blasts these big head kicks, and comes in with these wild looping shots to try to close the distance. If he hurts you, he goes in for the kill 100%. And if he doesn't, he'll switch levels, go for that double leg. And 90% of the time, this guy's putting you on your butt. So personally, I think Joanderson's going to have the advantage. I think Bill's style leads into Joanderson's takedowns. I think those karate blitzes that he does are going to leave him vulnerable. I've seen it in his past fights, and with the type of athlete Joanderson is, I think it's going to be easy work for him to get him down. Whether he can keep him down is the one thing, but I got my money on Joanderson by decision for this one because Bill's definitely a tough guy. Now, for our next fight on the card, we have a heavyweight bout. Interesting fight. Jake Collier versus Chase Sherman. Neither of these guys are the elite of the division, but tough guys who have managed to stay in the UFC for a number of years now, both veterans. We'll start with Jake. So Jake's 4-5 in the UFC. He's got good boxing, throws combos, really tough, stays really busy compared to a lot of other heavyweights. I mean, he's not in the best shape compared to some of them. He used to fight at middleweight, so definitely he's put on a lot of weight moving up to heavyweight. Whether all of that's necessarily weight or not, that's a different argument to be made, but still stays busy and has a higher than average output compared to most other heavyweights. But one thing I have seen of him is if you start going to the body on him, he really starts to slow down late in the fight. You saw in his last fight against Carlos Felipe, Carlos started really digging those shots to the body, and that's when I really saw the switch. Normally, Jake Collier can kind of keep it consistent, but in that fight, I saw him really the tides start to really turn after those body shots. But granted, he still came back in the last fight, and by no means was he put away. Just in a little trouble with the volume of Felipe, but who doesn't have problems with that guy? So yeah, so that's kind of where he's at now. In terms of Chase Sherman, 3-6 in the UFC, did a stunt in bare knuckle boxing, came back, looked really good, but has never really been able to put a solid string of fights together. Some of his strengths: he's got nice straight punches. They're not a bad speed for that heavyweight. Doesn't load up a lot, which I find is rare in that division. You see a lot of guys with these big looping shots, but Chase Sherman, for the most part, keeps them straight, has a nice straight jab. Good leg kicks. When he really wants to mix it up, guy's got great body kicks, great leg kicks. Nice elbows against the fence as well. But one thing that's just consistent in all of his fights is as the fight goes on, especially into the second and third round, he really just starts to slow down. And more importantly, not just his activity, but it's the head movement. His defense really starts to decline as these fights go on. And I think that's going to be a big issue for him in this fight. So in terms of how they match up, I think it's going to be a close fight, but they're both tough guys. I think Jake can withstand the early power of Sherman, and he's going to have the defense advantage. I think he has the better head movement in boxing. I think he has the better cardio, and I think over 3 rounds, he's going to cruise to a decision on this one. For Sherman, I don't think he has a great chance of winning this, but if you really see him going off of the Muay Thai early, investing in those leg kicks, then maybe it's an in-play bet kind of thing where you're going to put some money on him during the fight. But other than that, I think Jake Collier takes this all the way. Now for our next fight in the flyweight division, males flyweight division, Brandon Royval versus Rogerio Bontorin. Man, Brandon Royval, one of my favorite fighters to watch in the division. He's 2-2 in the UFC, but don't let that record fool you, man. This guy's one of the top prospects in the division. Great movement, great movement ability, weaponizes cardio, great scrambling ability as well. Not just on the feet, but him on the ground. This guy just never stops moving. It's really hard to secure him on the ground. Crazy exciting fighter. Loves to pressure to the point where he leaves himself open kind of times. Every fight this guy's in is wild, man. And people try to take him down at one point or another because he just never stops coming at you. I personally love to watch him fight. Throws a lot of spinning attacks as well. But that does lead him to one of his biggest vulnerabilities, where he has shown a pattern in his fights to constantly give up his back. And I think that's one of his biggest weaknesses. Otherwise, the guy's looked unbelievable, man. He's been putting everybody in danger on the feet at one point or another, and I think that small hole in his game has now cost him 2 fights. I think against Brandon Moreno, even though his shoulder popped out in that fight, and that's what ended up not being able to let him defend himself. I think what led to that position was Brendan taking his back and getting him to the ground. And it wasn't a back take that Brendan really forced. It was something that that Royval had presented to him. And I think the same thing happened in the Pantoja fight, man. Like, he was putting it on Pantoja, and you got to just watch that and just be frustrated because he gave him the only opportunity Pantoja had to win, and he just gave him his back. And otherwise, I think he would have finished Pantoja. And so I think it's really up to him tightening up those things, those key issues, and if he wants to move forward in the division, because the flyweight division, it's not that deep, but man, the top 5 in there is definitely stacked. So stiff competition ahead. Now for his opponent, Rogerio Bontorin. He's 3-2 in the UFC. Heavy hands, strong takedowns. He's short and stocky, and you see him elevate guys from the takedowns, and he's got a significant strength advantage over most of the guys in that division. Great control on the ground, has tons of wins by submission, and specifically by rear naked choke, so that's something you got to look out for. Now, in terms of his weaknesses, I think I've seen him, he's a little susceptible on the feet. Striking's not his finest weapon. I think that's the only place he's really going to have to worry too much here. I mean, Brandon's got an active guard, but Rogerio's top game is really good, so I don't see him getting into much trouble on the ground. It's really the feet that he has to worry about, a lot of these guys in the division. Now, in terms of how they match up, I think if Royval can really tighten up those holes we talked about, I really don't see him losing to a lot of the guys in the division. I think the times he has lost, he's kind of given that opportunity to his opponents, and if he can stay back and be a little bit more composed, pick his times to throw those spinning attacks, I think he's going to be a problem in this division. And I think especially Rogerio being the shorter fighter, Brandon has this amazing knee that he throws right up the middle, and you see him catch a lot of guys with it. And I think that's going to be a big weapon for him on this one, because it's going to deter Rogerio away from the takedowns. And he throws it tricky. He throws a lot of same-side attacks, like almost Tony Ferguson-esque, where he'll throw these body kicks and right hand over the top. But even more so, he'll throw the knee and then the right elbow or the right hand over the top. And I think that's going to be a big weapon for him in this fight. Honestly, the only way I can see him losing is if he just keeps that habit of just giving his back, and especially against a guy with Rogerio, who's got great control on the ground. I think he can hop on that back and submit him by rear naked choke. So if you're looking for an underdog, I think if you see if Brandon hasn't fixed those holes, man, I think Rogerio is definitely a guy who can take advantage of that. And I think he's going to see the blueprint that Pantoja laid out. And it might be a good underdog. I'm pretty sure he's a pretty sizable underdog. So if you're looking to place a bet, that might be a good one because of Royval's tendency there. But personally, I think Royval's got this. I think he's going to be a future title challenger, and I got high hopes for him. Now for our next fight on the card, another flyweight belt, this time in the female division, Katlyn Chookagian versus Jennifer Maia. I'm not as excited for this fight, but I still think it's an important fight for the division. Both have fought against Valentina, both lost, pretty much like everyone else in that division. But Katlyn's been one of those ones that's been hanging around the top of the division for a while now, and pretty much putting away almost everyone else. Some of her strengths: great cardio, comes from a karate background, really good at attacking from the outside. A lot of long front kicks, jabs really well, and has honestly cruised to a decision in most of her fights, just outpointing her opponents from the outside, and they really can't get into range with her. She's got really good range control, and that's been one of her greatest strengths in her fights. Now, in terms of her weaknesses, doesn't have a lot of power. Against some of these fighters that can really just walk forward through that, I think that those are the people who are going to pronounce the biggest challenge for her and just unload those power shots. I mean, Andrade was just able to just charge in, and Andrade has a chin, and blast her with that amazing body shot. But it's a matter of getting into that close range with her, and I think she's got got really good attacks before someone can get into that range, especially that front kick. That front kick is a thing of beauty, and I've seen her knock down a few people with that to the body. What else we have here? So I think she has a decent ground game. She has an active guard, but one thing I have seen is if you can get past her legs, get past her guard, she really doesn't have a great scrambling ability. A lot of her defense is all in the guard, and once she gets past, I think that's really a part of her game that she needs to work on, especially in MMA. Scrambling is a huge strength to have in terms of controlling where the fight goes. So I think that's something to look out for. Now, in terms of her opponent, Jennifer Maia, 4-3 in the UFC, Muay Thai background in terms of the striking, but black belt on the ground, dangerous off her back. We saw her submit Joanne Calderwood. Heavy top game too, even held down the champ for when champion made one mistake and Jennifer Maia got on top, and she was able to control her for a sizable amount of that round. So if she's controlling Valentina, she's got a great top game. Must be really heavy on top. She's a lot of forward pressure. Some of her weaknesses, doesn't have the greatest head movement, gets hit a bit, but is really tough. And only other thing, gets a little one-dimensional sometimes. If she's mixing it up, she can actually do really well on the feet, but you see her get a little carried away with her boxing sometimes, and I think her not mixing it up is definitely a weakness in her game, but something she could easily improve on. Now, how these two match up, a lot of people don't know these two already fought, and Katlyn does what she always does, cruised to a decision, kept her on the outside. She showed some great boxing in that fight, sat down on her punches a little bit, but again, strength, that one punch power has never been something Katlyn's had. So putting those combos together, she cruised to a decision. And honestly, I think it's going to be a lot of the same here. If you look at their last two fights, I think Jennifer Maia didn't do anything amazing. She doesn't show great takedown ability to be able to control where the fight goes. And I think regardless, Katlyn has pretty good takedown defense. So I honestly think this is going to be a repeat of the first fight. Katlyn keeps her on the outside, cruises a decision. Maia's chasing after her the whole time and hitting her for most of it. But yeah, so that's the female fight on the card. Next, we go to the welterweight division. Michel Pereira versus Muslim Salikhov. Muslim Salikhov, the king of kung fu. I love that nickname. This is going to be an amazing fight. A lot of people are saying this card is boring. It's a shitty way to start off the year, but I think, especially this main card, there's a lot of sleepers on here, and I think this is one of them. Michel Pereira, 4-2 in the UFC, but if you've never seen this guy fight, he is one of the most entertaining fighters. Never seen someone try to attack with a backflips, jumps off the cage, does everything, every antic you could possibly think of. But underneath all that, I think a lot of people get caught up in that, but underneath all that, the guy is actually a very talented striker. He's amazing at closing the distance, closes really quick, uses that athleticism really well, has an amazing front kick as well. Another guy with a great front kick, and he's very consistent with it. You saw him in his last couple fights, he's been consistent with it, and I think that's something that's going to be a big weapon of his going forward. Huge power. This guy, he beat Chaos Williamson and was putting it on Chaos. And Chaos is a guy who's also known for his power and just had nothing for him in that fight. So I'm very high on Michel Pereira. I think the only thing he's got to do is just stay controlled within himself. I think he learned after his first fight. His first fight, he lost a decision to a much smaller fighter. Just being wild, just running around, doing flips, doing crazy shit. And I think since then, after his second fight, a little bit of the same thing. And I think as he went on, he kind of learned his lesson a bit, and he's been a lot more controlled so far. So it's a matter of him just sticking with that, because otherwise, haven't seen too many weaknesses from the guy other than that. And he may have some trouble with a strong wrestler, but that's not who he's going against here. So on to his opponent, Muslim Salikhov, the king of kung fu. 5-1 in the UFC. man, what to say about this guy? Some of the best kicks in the division, spinning kicks, very powerful body kicks as well, roundhouse kicks, but just the speed on this guy's kicks is just insane. It doesn't look like a fast guy at all, but when his hips go, those spinning back kicks come out of nowhere. Also has a great left hook and really great at range. I think the only times I've really seen him hurt is in the boxing range and people being able to close the distance on him pretty quickly. I think if he's in that kickboxing range and can keep that distance, there's not a lot of guys in this division that are going to beat him. So it's really in that boxing range that he's been hurt and been put in danger before. But other than that, not really much of a takedown threat. Pretty one-dimensional in terms of that as well. So in terms of how these two match up, I'm leaning towards Pereira on this one. I think Pereira is going to be the faster of the two. He's going to be able to close the distance quicker, and I think he can really put a pace on him. And I've also seen him mix in some takedowns, something I haven't seen from Salikhov's game. So I think if Michel Pereira puts in a nice, well-rounded game plan and can kind of mix everything up but still stay patient, he's gonna do really well in this fight, and I think he can put a beating on Salikhov. The key is he just can't hang out too much on the outside, because if you give Salikhov too much time to work and start setting up these kicks, it's gonna be a long night, and I think that's really what he's got to do. He's got to put a controlled pace on Salikhov and not let him get comfortable in that range. And I think if he can mix up the takedowns, he has a really good chance of winning this fight. Now, from Salikhov's point of view, I think he's really just got to try to stay on the outside and set up those kicks and get his game going. But I think Michel just has more weapons, and that's why I'm picking him to win this fight. Now, for the main event, featherweight bout, Giga Chikadze versus Calvin Kattar. A fight I am ecstatic for. Giga, 7-0 in the UFC. I mean, incredible kickboxer. Amazing setups. Mixes his kicks. Talking about a great kicker, especially coming off of just talking about Salikhov. But Giga really sets these kicks up just incredibly. I mean, you see him in the fights. He knows exactly when he's hurt someone to the body, and he'll even feint with his eyes, look down, and just go high. And because his kicks aren't that traditional, he doesn't throw these wide roundhouse kicks. You see a lot of his kicks come up and then turn at the last second. Because of that, because of the angle that they come at, it's very hard to tell where they're going. I mean, watching some of his KOs in slow motion, I couldn't even tell whether he was going to the body or going to the head at some points. And I think it's one of the trickiest parts of his game and why he's gotten so many of those body kick KOs. And so I think that's definitely one of the strongest parts of his game. But I mean, don't get me wrong, guy's got great hands too. I think from the kickboxing standpoint, he's one of the best in the division. Ground game, he's been able to survive on the ground. You've seen some okay sweeps from him. He's got decent timing. Not an advanced ground game by any means, but has been able to survive. And I think going against strikers is just when you see his full depth. I mean, that fight against Edson Barbosa, a lot of people beat Edson with forward pressure and putting just a pace on them and mixing the game up and just really overwhelming them. Like, you think about all the guys who beat Edson, it's just been overwhelming, or they've been a strong takedown threat. Giga let Edson come to him and just start picking him apart. And don't get me wrong, it was a competitive fight, but Giga just started pulling away with it, and that finish was just brutal. And that's the thing about Giga. He's definitely a finisher. And it's going to be very interesting to see how he matches up with Kattar in this. Now, on to Calvin Kattar. 6-3 in the UFC, but has been fighting absolute savages. I mean, losses coming to Zabit and Max Holloway are two of those losses. So, I mean, nothing to laugh at there. Great boxing. Snipes people, man. He's a sniper. He really sets up those shots well. You see him he'll often go with a double jab, just kind of in front of the opponent's guard, and then that right hand just comes through and blasts through. And he just covers so much distance with that, and he's caught a lot of people by surprise with that. Often sets it up with the double jab or a slapping left hook, almost just just slaps the guard and then boom, right down the middle with that right hand, and you see him cover the distance with it. It's one of his best weapons there. Great cardio. I mean, you've never seen him fade. Often actually comes on later in the fights. Extremely tough, unfortunately, that we saw in that Max Holloway fight, and strong in the later rounds. Even though it's a beat loss, he really came on in that third round, and I think it would have been a 5-round fight. The scorecards could have gone the other way. Now, in terms of Kattar's weaknesses, I mean, he's coming off a big loss. He's coming off a brutal loss against Max Holloway, 5-round beating, and it was hard to watch, but you don't want to read too much into it because you also saw Brian Ortega bounce back from something like that. So it's not to say that Kattar can't bounce back because we haven't seen him really get viciously hurt or anything like that before. So I don't think he's by any means done with this division, but I think the time off and combined with the fact that he's naturally a slow starter is going to be a problem for him. I think sometimes he's not as active if he needs to be in those first rounds, and I think especially in the Moicano fight, he showed he was really susceptible to leg kicks and kicks in general, and I think with the long torso, that could be a problem. That could open up doors for Giga. Now, in terms of how these two match up, I think Calvin's gonna have the boxing advantage, but not by as much as people think. I think Giga's kickboxing career is very extensive, and I think he's gonna have seen a lot of looks when it comes to the boxing. Now, if Kattar's gonna be trying to mix in his takedowns, I saw an interview with him today talking about, it's not just boxing, it's MMA, and kind of made it seem like his game plan was really to mix it up. I haven't seen him do that in any of his fights, really. I mean, I've seen him shoot Hail Mary takedowns or things just to mix it up, but nothing really committed. And I think to pull that out and just show a new wrinkle to his game all of a sudden is very rare. Not to say that he can't do it, but I'm a little doubtful that he'll be able to really control the fight with wrestling. And Giga, man, I mean, once you've shown a weakness to leg kicks, even if you've improved on that, Giga's going to be the guy to expose it. And Calvin, honestly, he has a great guard for boxing, but it's very traditional. He covers up a lot, tight guard, high guard too, and I think that's going to leave him open to those body kicks a lot, especially early on. I don't know if Giga's going to be able to finish him, but I think it's going to be a war, and I think Giga's going to hurt him early a couple times, and if he doesn't finish him early, I think he's going to hurt him enough in the earlier rounds, to the point where Calvin's just playing catch up the rest of the time, and I don't know if he's going to be able to do what it takes to really finish him in those later rounds. But we haven't seen Giga in those 5-round fights, and we have seen Calvin, and we know he keeps coming no matter how much damage he's taken. So there is that to consider, but I think I'm going with Giga on this one. I think he's going to be the next title challenger in the UFC. I think him versus Yair would be the battle of the kickers. That would be an amazing fight. But I'm high on Giga on this one. I think Calvin's got a lot more left, but I think he's just got a few holes in the game he has to clear up before he can really start making some runs in the division again. Anyways, that's our card. Thank you all for watching. I appreciate you guys tuning in. Let me know what you guys think of the breakdown. I'll be doing one for every UFC card coming up, so I appreciate any support I get. Anyways, have a great weekend and enjoy the fights.